So why should we care about this? Okay, the answer for China, okay, at least at the most superficial level, is growth. Okay, so standard theories of growth link it very strongly to the growth of the working age cohort, okay, and that's going to be important for China, and the dependency ratio, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so here's something that you may know and you may not know, but it's a very important fact, especially if you're a China watcher. Okay, so let's take a look at the growth rate of the working age populace. Okay, so there are two definitions of working age. Okay, so you don't have to be particularly sensitive if you're in your early 60s. Okay, so the red one is 15 to 59 and the blue one is 15 to 69. Okay, so here's China. So you had this tremendous growth in the working age population peak, and now they're actually shrinking. Okay, so the Chinese working population actually peaked about 6 or 7 years ago, depending on exactly when you date it. And they're actually, the size of the working cohort is in decline in China. So part of that was, of course, because they had this tremendous burst of fertility, then the fertility fell. As the fertility fell, the number of people who are actually employable, okay, is shrinking. By comparison, the United States had not nearly as much of a run up, but then by comparison, it's still positive and small. Okay, so the size of the working age populace in China is shrinking and will shrink for the foreseeable future for at least 15 years. That's going to be a big negative thing on Chinese growth. Completely forecastable. Okay, and incidentally, that's a good thing if you're living in the United States, okay, because the strains that a society goes through when GDP growth falls tremendously are huge, and you don't want to be in the first country that goes through them. Okay, so we're all happy that Japan has this problem much worse than China, okay, because they had a very, very short baby boom. They're going through what's called the demographic transition. Their working age populace has been shrinking for quite a while. Tremendous strains on society, and we'll see how it plays out in Japan way before Western Europe or Australia or the United States or Canada or something like that. But China has this problem in a very serious way. So most people are really interested in what's going to happen with China. Is it slowing down? As most of you know, China used to be growing at 10% year in, year out like clockwork. About 3 or 4 years ago, it started to slow down somewhat dramatically. We now think that the steady state growth rate is around 7%, and certainly that's what the leadership would like. Okay, Chinese growth, okay, is not only relatively slow compared to where it used to be, but it's being continually downgraded recently. So here are 4 different forecasts that have just been spread out over the last few years. And every time Chinese growth forecasts are updated, they're updated down. Okay, and incidentally, that's true not just of China, but of most of the world. If you've looked at American growth or especially European growth recently, all the forecasts have been downgraded recently. So I want to spend a little bit of time looking forward in the very short run about what's going to happen over the next few years, focusing on China, but not exclusively China. Okay, so what do we mean by a slowdown in China? Okay. Usually people split things up into what's called a soft landing and a hard landing. Okay? I want to talk about how big is the effect of both of those things going to be on different regions and different countries, at least briefly. I'll leave aside lots of technical stuff, but let me assure you that behind the analysis that I'm talking about is a bunch of technical stuff that I've done. I'm just not going to have time to cover it, but I'm happy to give you details if you want. Okay, so what's a soft landing look like? Okay, so a soft landing for China looks like a reduction in not the level of GDP, so nobody's talking about a recession, a reduction in the growth rate of GDP that's quite mild, about 25 basis points a year. Okay, almost all of that's going to come from Chinese investment. As I hope most of you know, Chinese consumption historically has been very low. They're engaged in what's called rebalancing towards raising consumption and lowering investment. Okay, so investment is going to be where almost all the deceleration in Chinese growth comes from. Okay, and something like another 25 basis points a year is similar to the sort of slowdown that we've already seen in Chinese growth. And it would be a relatively orderly thing. We'll talk about its implications. However, many people are worried about what's typically known as the hard landing. So a hard landing is a much more dramatic effect on Chinese economic growth, okay? And of course, when I've done the hard landing and the soft landing, you'll be able to do the in-between cases by just combining them. So what's a hard landing? Chinese growth falls by an extra 2 percentage points. So this starts to get to the level where the Chinese leadership is worried about political stability. Okay, so the usual rule of thumb was that if the Chinese leadership did not deliver 7% growth a year, then there would be tremendous political instability. So this goes way below that, and I'm going to ignore the effects of political instability. Okay, and those would just be big extra negatives. Okay, I'm also going to include in the hard landing scenario a spike up in global risk aversion. Okay, and to quantify it, most of you know the VIX, the standard measure of stock market volatility that's forecast by the markets. Okay, I'm going to include a spike of about a third the size of the Lehman shock. Okay, so the Lehman shock is the most dramatic on record. The Lehman shock in mid-September 2008, when I was teaching one cohort of the executive MBAs in this classroom. Okay, and it's going to be about a third of that size. So that's still a very dramatic thing.